I'm Fatheree.
This is Dave.
This is Bryan.
And this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
So welcome back aboard the starship Texas for the 104th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we talk all about Star Trek all the time. And today, the day of recording, is day 171 of our year of hell, to give you a hint about what we're talking about. Also, happy Juneteenth day of recording, and happy Pride Month.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But in light of recent horrific events, we are discussing the Voyager two-part story, Year of Hell.
What could be more timely?
Both episodes written by Brannon, Braga, and Joe Menosky, and part 1 directed by Allan Kroeker, part 2 directed by Mike Voyager. And I just want to say, Mike Voyager has, the coolest name for a Star Trek director, because his name is Voyager. I think
is it spelled like Veejur?
It's spelled Vejer, but it shows up in the credits in Star Trek a lot.
Yes. He's a very common
director.
It's spelled
Vejer?
Vejar.
Oh, the AR. I was like, oh wow, does it actually have the almost little apostrophe thing? I'm disappointed to hear there's an A in there, but it's still pretty cool, I guess.
But before we talk about Star Trek Voyager, let's talk about the new stuff. Real quick, just got a small update on Lower Decks as well as Discovery Season 3. And there's a little bit of news that came out in the last week. Lower Decks, they revealed 2 new images from the show through Entertainment Weekly. One of them was just a look of the lower deck crew members, the ensigns, the junior officers, hanging out drinking some margaritas. And the other image was
I hope that's Synthahol people.
we have the captain and the security officer and some other people with phasers aimed towards the camera, covered in black goo, and the main character Boimler is covered in purple goo. So I don't know what was happening there, but Mike McMahon, the showrunner, just gave a little bit of details that I'll kind of just summarize here. He basically said that some of the things we've heard before about Lower Decks, but this is a show that is not going to parody the big sci-fi Star Trek events that are going to happen in the show. What would normally be the A story, all that stuff is still going to happen, but while the bridge officers are dealing with that, we're going to get these B stories with the lower deck people that he described as social emotional stories. So kind of what he said before, there would always be a big A story in the Next Generation, but then there'd be a B story where Data's learning to paint or something like that. And this is going to focus more on that type of stuff happens in 10 Forward when they're off duty. That's kind of going to be the emphasis of this show, but it's going to be with those lower deck people who are going to be he mentioned working on turbo lifts, and to them the captain, it sounds like the captain is not going to be a poker buddy with them. It's going to be someone who sometimes might be a little antagonistic. They have to be the hard ass and give orders, but they are also doing the balancing act of being the aspirational leader. But there's going to be a little bit more distance. These are the junior officers. They're not buddy with their captain.
Isn't that usually the first officer's job, is to ride the crew?
Yeah, but I guess it comes from, Picard was definitely a hard ass in season 1 of Next Generation. He seemed less like the disciplined guy than Riker, or I'm sorry, more so.
Who was that? Who was that person who spilled coffee or whatever on him one time?
Oh, Ensign Gomez.
Yeah,
I love that when that happens, is that like Geordi like tries to apologize. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Captain. This is all my fault." And then Picard says, "Indeed." Like, why is that Geordi's fault?
Man, yeah, Picard was prickly sometimes.
McMahon had this one quote though that I do want to share, where he's about when they're talking about possible cameos showing up on Lower Decks. Because Jonathan Frakes is going to voice Riker and show up on there. And so that's a given. That's going to happen at some point. But McMahon said, there are a lot of recognizable characters in the galaxy at that point. Next Gen is my favorite era. As a huge Trek fan, I would definitely want to try to use some of them so that I could not only build out the world, but also work with some of my heroes. But I can't get more specific than that. You'll have to wait and see. So I think that there will be some cameos in there.
It better be Barclay.
Possibly. I mean, it worked for Voyager.
Hey, Fatheree, is Frakes directing any episodes?
I doubt it, because animation is kind of a different world of directing.
What made you so sure that he would show up when we've had various other TNG people like Troy and stuff show up as well in 7? Why did you say Frakes?
Because Jonathan Frakes has shown up in every Star Trek show except for the original series and Discovery.
So you're just saying he's a Star Trek slut, basically.
Yeah, he's easy. Frakes is easy.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Jonathan Frakes, I love you, but you like doing the work, so nothing wrong in admitting to that.
I don't want to Trek shame him.
Yeah. Moving on real quick to Discovery Season 3, then we can get on with our main topic of Year of Hell. But brief update on Discovery Season 3. Some of the editors were on Twitter talking about working on the show. One guy tweeted that he's done with his job editing, and then some of the other editors, they said, we're still working, but we're working as quickly as we can, and we're trying to make it as good and as fast as we can. And just having to work remotely has slowed things down a little bit, but they are still chugging along, getting that show ready to drop on CBS All Access. I'm going to say, like, in the fall. I was actually talking to Dr. Trek himself, Larry Nemeczek, about a week ago, and I asked him what did he think, and he said, like, yeah, it was probably, like, originally going to come out, like, around this time in the middle of the summer, but instead will be probably sometime after Labor Day. So we'll see it when we see it, but it is still on the way. Let's talk about our real-life Year of Hell, 2020, before we get into the Voyager episode.
Yeah.
Kind of at the halfway point of the year.
There's endless memes. I'm sure people have seen these that'll be like, hey, remember when such and such event happened? And they'll be like, that was, 6 weeks ago. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh my God, that was like, I thought that was last year. It really does feel, the time feels distended. What's that metaphor in Lord of the Rings, like butter, or like too much, what is it?
Butter scraped over spread bread? Over too much bread.
Yeah, I couldn't quite say the metaphor. Thank you. But yes, that's what the whole fucking year feels like.
R.I.P. Ian Holmes. But yeah. I don't think that line is in the movie. I could be wrong though.
No, it is. It absolutely is.
Okay.
I can actually hear how he kind of says it with a quaver in his voice.
But yeah, like this year has been like rough for a lot of people. Like I'm gonna be real self-indulgent and just talk about it in a little personal and talk about how like this has been like a really rough year for me. Just starting off pretty early in the year. I mean, like before the year even started, like Star Wars really broke my heart with that very disappointing movie and the other Star franchise. But I was excited going into 2020. I was really looking forward to getting 3 Star Trek shows. I was determined to make it like a cool year and start off like this new decade. And I try not to get too political on here, but I was kind of hoping for there were some political winds were changing here in the United States where I live to what I would consider closer to the ideals and values of Star Trek. And I was very enthusiastic about supporting what was described as a political revolution and maybe a certain presidential candidate that I was actually putting a lot of like time and effort into like volunteering for and organizing for. And then kind of like almost immediately after the year started, a lot of things started going downhill for me. I had a girlfriend I live with lost a job. Our dog died. And with that being like our only pet, we kind of went from feeling like we have like a family at home to just being like a couple at home. And that was like
If I'm not
a big
mistaken, it
loss.
was like her first pet as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, her first dog. She'd had other pets, but yeah, that was like a kind of a big medical expense. Our car got broke into. Both of our identities got stolen. We fortunately like came off like pretty lucky with that, and we ended up like not having any financial loss. But it was pretty scary there for a while. That political revolution I was hoping for did not happen. A friend that I recently like reconnected with, someone that I used to be like really close with, was also like going through like a really hard time, like losing a mother to cancer, and it brought up a lot of the feelings and memories I had from losing a mother to cancer a few years ago, which was kind of like the worst thing that ever happened to me. So I kind of like relived all of that, even like went to a funeral in the same funeral home, and like having to like try to like be supportive of my friend. And then that friend ended up like moving away to the other side of the country. And then just a lot of bad stuff the first few months of the year. And that's like not even talking about like this global pandemic that we've had, which doesn't even make it into my top 5 worst things that have happened so far in 2020. But yeah, it's been a rough year for me. And I used to be someone, well, I guess I still am, but I always try to look for silver linings and tell myself, things aren't that bad, as long as the people you care about are still alive and with you, like you can get over the other stuff. And it's like this is probably like the most defeated I've ever felt. So I definitely can relate to like the characters in this episode of Star Trek, which are also just constantly getting like the shit kicked out of them like month after month.
It's interesting, Fatheree. I know you, as a fan of Superman, have experienced sometimes the fans who will talk about how he's not relatable because he's so powerful, and yet, there's so many levels that he is relatable on. He's an immigrant. He's a guy who's trying to do his best. He grew up raised by farmers. He has many relatable qualities, and my point in mentioning that is just that. These shows that we watch, these genre shows, often work in sort of metaphor, and it seems strange, like it might seem strange to somebody that an episode of a sci-fi show about a like time distortion, alternate timeline where a ship is on the run and chased and wrecked would feel relatable. Like it doesn't seem like on the surface that it should, but like Superman, it's one of those things where it's like there's we relate to not the specifics, but the broad energy and the beats of these things sometimes.
Yeah, that's a lot of times like the bigger than life fiction is closer to the real emotion than like a more accurate like I'm not like a huge fan of Scott Pilgrim. I think it's pretty good, but like a lot of people like really love that comic or really love that movie. But basically like, oh yeah, like dealing with a new partner's baggage does kind of feel like you're having to fight all of these ghosts from her past. So like it kind of, I mean, like that's what it feels like. That's not what it literally is, but just using that as an example.
Yeah, they found a sort of entertaining way to sell it or to like revisit that. And this is obviously Year of Hell is much more serious kind of thing. And let me ask you, Fatheree, just as a real quick thing before we get into it or anything, is it cathartic to watch somebody kind of make it through these things, or does it make it worse?
No, I don't feel worse. And like a lot of things with like in real life do kind of give me hope. I'm kind of optimistic, especially recently how I've seen a huge reaction to a lot of the injustice that we face, specifically here in the United States. But a lot of the the protests against police brutality and just like the sheer activism of people, trying to take a stand for Black Lives Matter has like it's definitely inspired me because I've been wanting people to like get mad and take direct action for years. So it gives me a lot of hope to see that people are willing to do that. And I just want to mention that in the the comments or the description, however you're watching this or listening to this, I will post a link to a Black Lives Matter website where you can find information on volunteering, or you can donate financial contributions and stuff like that. So just anyone who is able to help, please check out that link and pitch in and be part of that effort.
Hell yeah.
We will go ahead and jump into talking about Year of Hell itself, the actual episodes. If you don't remember, these are the ones where the dad from that 70s show is changing time, and it completely ends up wrecking Voyager because of the Year of Hell he puts that ship through. And it was a part 1 and part 2 story. And we're going to totally spoil everything, so go rewatch it or watch it for the first time if you need to. We're assuming everyone is familiar with it going forward. But just to refresh everyone, Dave, can you give us the synopses for these 2 episodes?
Sure. This is straight up pulled from good old Star Trek Memory Alpha site. So the first one, these are just one-line descriptions, goes, obsessed with restoring the Krenim Imperium no matter the cost. A Krenim military temporal scientist creates changes in history that all but destroy Voyager. So that is episode 1. And episode 2 goes, with Voyager almost destroyed, Captain Janeway risks everything to rescue Paris and Chakotay and stop Anarax from continuing to tamper with the timeline. Anarax is, of course, the dad from that 70s show, Red Foreman, or Clarence Boddicker from RoboCop, as I like to think of him.
Yeah, I think of him as Clarence a lot. Can you fly, Bobby? I'm not going to say his other line because it's not politically correct to say, but the other famous line from that movie.
Yes.
It's
like a variant of Ladies Leave.
Yeah. He has some Star Trek credentials, too, though. He's the president of Star Trek 6. He also plays a Cardassian in DS9. He was actually the chief of security on the station back when it was Terok Nor, before Odo was chief of security. We see him in the flashback.
That's pretty cool.
But, yeah, he is our villain, and I think he's a little bit more of a deeper character than we typically get for the villains on the TV shows. I do want to spend some time talking about him later on in the podcast when we get to it, but he's certainly one of the more entertaining aspects of watching Year of Hell.
Yeah, I actually, as it was going through, this is my first visit of it, I was not sure if he was going to, like, how serious they were going to, like, how deep they were going to get with him, or if he was just kind of just a master villain that actor brought something extra to. But yeah, they definitely wanted him to have a little bit more depth than average.
Yeah, and some of that came from the writing, but also the performance was really great.
Yeah, it's pretty nuanced for him, not super over the top. He's real kind of reined in, don't you think?
Yeah, he's kind of reserved. But you kind of need both of those. You kind of need like the good writing and the good performance to make it like a truly memorable character. This is kind of like elevated up among the other countless characters in the show. This one that's going to stand out and be memorable.
Yeah. I mean, it also owes a great deal to Jules Verne, I believe. But
yes, and I did want to talk about that in the writing. Brannon, Braga, and Joe Menosky, actually, they were like, oh, let's watch 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and try to draw some inspiration from that. In fact, the name Anarax, according to the Star Trek Encyclopedia, that came from a character at 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but not Nemo, Professor Pierre Aronnax or something like that.
Yeah, he's the narrator of the novel. He's basically the one telling you the story of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and he's kind of in the more Chakotay Paris role, the guy who gets brought on board.
I have never read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, nor seen any full film version. I've seen bits and pieces. Just one of those weird things that's slipped past the geek radar. I should who was the one of the actors in that died recently? Like, wasn't it like the lead, I guess, from the Disney version? Didn't he die somewhat recently? Whoever that actor
not that
is.
I'm aware of.
Okay. For some reason, I remember thinking, oh, this would be a good time to finally watch that and get that under, get that scene. But anyway, my question is, I know that Captain Nemo captures, wrecks a ship from some sailors and takes some of them on?
Takes,
And is there
some of the passengers, yes.
is there some question as to whether they sort of will go native? Because he's kind of, terrorizing the sea lanes? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, he's running around with the Nautilus sinking ships. And then he saves these two guys in the water. And they're our point of view characters. And then he kind of like Aronnax in Year of Hell, kind of opens up to them, has dinner with, like, the dinner scene feels like it was lifted right out of the novel,
okay.
including would you believe all this amazing food that I have access to because of my special ship? Is all of that's right out of the book.
Okay,
Tom Paris
cool.
even connects those dots in the episode. He even compares them to Nemo.
Yeah. Cool. No, I appreciate the info though. It's just like I said, it's a gap in my knowledge.
I have always loved that storytelling gimmick of getting your life saved by the villain and then being trapped with the villain after he saves you in some fashion.
And he's kind of courteous in his weird way, honorable way.
Yeah. You can't write just, you know he's evil, but you also don't have an excuse to go shoot him or, hit him with a tire iron yet. And you kind of feel like you owe him, and it's a wonderful place to be in a story, I think.
Well, a little bit of verbal jousting over a dinner is always fun. Space Seed, that is, of course, has a notable version of that.
We gave them order!
Yeah.
Yes.
It's kind of reversed. It's reversed in Space Seed. Kirk is Nemo. He's the one who rescues Khan. But they're still got that antagonism. They just reverse who the good guy and the bad guy are. But it's the same gimmick.
But they did put a lot of thought into this story because originally it was going to be a much bigger story. In fact, there was an idea at one point for it to be an entire season. And then at one point they're like, we can't do that. We can do 4 episodes. And then it eventually became this 2-parter. But even then, it was going to be the season 3 finale going into the season 4 premiere. But then they decided they were going to do Scorpion and bring in the Borg and 7 of 9. So they pushed Year of Hell back a little bit. They did try to set it up in season 3 of Voyager, though. In the episode before and after, season 3, episode 21. This is the one where Kes is kind of like, she's kind of like Merlin from another classic piece of literature, the Once and Future King, where she's going through time backwards. She's starting on like her deathbed and then jumping forward and eventually all the way to her infancy and moment of birth. But she's as she's coming back through time, she visits the Year of Hell, an alternate timeline version. And we learned some stuff about the Year of Hell, or at least that version of it. Kes gets chronoton radiation poisoning from a Krenim torpedo. These people have some type of weaponized time. We learned that they're under constant attack from these people. In this timeline, the Doctor is offline for months. Janeway dies. B'Elanna dies. Joe Carey, the recurring character, dies. Kes has a baby, though, during that timeline, which with Tom Paris and some other stuff with that. But the stuff related to Year of Hell that we also got is that she has like a report on these weapons, and we also know that she knew that that 1.47 microsecond thing about the torpedo. And Janeway even asks her like, so like give me like all the information you have. And yet in Year of Hell, they never mention any of that stuff. They kind of just like skip all.
I can see why they don't bring that up, as the amount of exposition you'd have to do to explain that to somebody who hasn't seen before and after, and the fact that Kes isn't even on the show anymore. I can see why they'd really want to try to dodge that and just leave it as something subtle that only the big nerds are going to pick up on. That said, hinging a major plot point on that little bit of technobabble that they should already know, it was perhaps not the wisest thing they did.
They have to know that 1.47 thing because they needed that for the Doctor to fix Kes when he put her in like that that big tube to like make her stop jumping for time.
But they didn't necessarily have to make that a linchpin for in the year of hell as well.
I mean, 7 of 9 sacrifices Tuvok's eyesight for something that they should have already had like written down somewhere.
Yes.
It is like
thought. They could have put a little bit more thought into that. They could have still accomplished all those big plot points that they wanted to accomplish, and just like a little bit more of a thoughtful way. That's all I'm saying. But I mean, they did give themselves some wiggle room by like stating in that episode that like this is just a possible future. And it also raises a lot of questions by Kes not being on the ship anymore when we get to the actual year of hell. And when she left the ship, she rather politely pushed the ship 10 years further in its journey. So you would think, wouldn't they have skipped over Krenim space? But me and Brian were talking about this before recording today, and the theory that we've come up with is that maybe that still happened in that before and after timeline, except there somehow Kes like returned to Voyager before the year of hell, and that way that works. That checks all the boxes. It all works out.
Yeah. So the push happened in both.
So that has been no prized. You heard it here first. Dave, there was some recent new information revealed about this from Bryan Fuller, who is best known now for being the guy who tried to start Star Trek Discovery and then got fired. But he's also
the
like
mushroom man.
Yeah, he's really into mushrooms and bald Klingons. But he was a Star Trek Voyager writer. He wrote some pretty cool stuff on that show. I am a big fan of Bride of Chaotica. He has talked about this recently, though, on the Inglorious Treksperts podcast. So, Dave, can you let everyone know? These are just excerpts from that. I'll have a link for that also if anyone wants to go listen to the podcast and hear the thing in its entirety. But here's some of the relevant stuff he mentioned about Star Trek Voyager and this episode specifically.
Sure. I can't quite think what Bryan Fuller sounds like, so I'm just going to give it my best shot.
Go for it.
So he says, this is sort of more general talk first. He says, I think Voyager was initially trying to be the next generation and finally decided what it was going to be around season 4. I think part of that, in a strange way, is we lost very quickly the dynamics of the Maquis interacting with the Starfleet crew. They were terrorists and committed terrorist acts, and everybody was like, it's okay, let's all go together. That's not good storytelling. You need to know these characters are coming from a place that is culturally different. So they can't just be regular members of the crew, which it fell into very quickly to solve the problem of Deep Space Nine. I'll just jump ahead into some of the other stuff he says because he goes on to talk about some of that. And but first of all, he's talking about sort of the credit to the writers of the episode Year of Hell, or episodes.
Yeah, Brannon, Braga, and Joe Menosky.
Mm-hmm. Is that Menosky? He says Brannon and Braga should be given a lot of credit. Brannon, Braga, and Joe Menosky. And it really was their two voices more commonly than anybody else's. I think that was interesting in the evolution of the show I think that was interesting in the evolution of the show was you could sense the creative struggle. I witnessed the creative struggle when I was working there. There was an appetite for these bigger, bolder science fiction stories. There was a lot of resistance from Rick Berman in embracing them because he was chasing the next generation and was not allowing Voyager to be the show it could be.
You know, originally, like, Voyager was going to have, you were going to have, like, this Maquis crew and the Starfleet crew, and they were going to be at odds against each other.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Rick Berman, because Rick Berman didn't like the Deep Space Nine wasn't as well received as Next Generation was, you know, right out of the gate. People were a little unsure about DS9, so he's like, okay, that show is too dark. We can't be like that. This needs to be more like Next Generation. These
more
people
episode
need to get
of the
along.
week.
Yeah, everyone needs to be like one big happy crew, like Khan, like we're all one big happy fleet. That was Rick Berman, basically. That's a genetically engineered madman. But yeah, but Dave, Bryan Fuller also had like some comments on the hypothetical Year of Hell season that they originally wanted to do.
Right. Says the Year of Hell and the behind-the-scenes drama, not only to craft the episode, but that season was fascinating because we wanted Year of Hell to last the entire season. We wanted to see Voyager get its ass kicked every episode, and through that season was going to be marbled the story of Anarax and the time ship that was changing things. So we would go back to it every once in a while to remind the audience that is the larger story. But it was rejected because Deep Space Nine made Rick Berman allergic to serialized storytelling, violently so.
I love
So
that
yeah, they
quote.
were gonna like jump around, like we would like what they all the stuff that they do in the episode, which is they periodically cut to Anarax and Chakotay and Tom Paris, but it was clearly going to be these longer, deeper arcs.
Yeah, you could kind of like Farscape Peacekeeper Wars. You can watch Year of Hell and say, okay, that 10-minute scene would have been an episode. That 10-minute scene would have been an episode.
So would they? Do y'all think like they would have like had like some, Planet of the Week episodes in there, but all
Sure.
of it informed by the fact that their resources.
I think they would have
bare
had
bones.
to if they were going to do 22 episodes. Is that what the seasons were?
It just would have been relevant to like the Year of Hell status quo. Like that
Yeah.
wouldn't have gone away. It
what
would
if
be
they
like Enterprise Season 3. Enterprise Season 3 basically is what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
They
with
could
the
have had
Xindi
some
War.
kind of a shady Harry Mudd type who's like, hey, I've got parts I can sell you cheap, but you got to do me some favors or something like that. I was just thinking, I was trying to figure out if
Voyager's desperation, maybe in Voyager's desperation, they're the ones doing like shady stuff.
Yeah. And it seems like the writers were excited for those kind of possibilities. Shall I jump to that portion of the interview?
Go for it.
He says, we're really going to be on the outskirts of the galaxy and are going to be fighting enemies that are kicking us when we're down. The crew is going to have to separate, and we're going to be following episodes that are going to deal with people on shuttlecrafts with escape pods that are electrically buoyed together. There would be an episode where you never saw Janeway and never saw Voyager because you're with the people who are on the escape pods trying to find a new source of power or safety. It was like creative crack for the writers' room because all of a sudden there were so many opportunities. So it seems like this like fired them all up, only it didn't happen.
Yes.
Yeah, and I do want to comment just real quick, that idea of like the escape pods being electrically bound together and like attached to a shuttlecraft makes Chakotay's plan in this episode make so much more sense. Because when he's like, we could just like hop into escape pods and try to like abandon Voyager and re-meet on the other side of Krenim space. It's like, you know how long it's gonna take an escape pod to float across the Krenim territory? Like those things don't have warp. That's a really stupid plan. But knowing this part of it, that finally makes sense and doesn't bother me anymore.
Yeah. Well, again, I think we're seeing dozens of episodes mashed into a two-parter. Sorry.
That said, if I had never known that, I think I would have just been like, oh, they just wanted to do kind of like a hardcore episode, a little bit like the Galactica episode 33, which launched the show, which I'll want to maybe talk a little bit more about later. But, just that they wanted to do kind of a hardcore survival episode. Other than a few bits and pieces like Chakotay's plan, there's nothing in it that like would just make me think, oh, this surely must have been planned for a bigger arc, if I had never known.
I guess when I first watched it back in its original broadcast day, I don't know if I knew it was, I can't say I knew that it was supposed to be more than 2 episodes, but I felt like it would have been better if it had been more than 2 episodes. I felt like I wanted more of this.
This very special episode should get more.
Tell us why that didn't happen.
It did not happen because, he says, I remember Brannon going over to Rick's office with all of this enthusiasm and coming back broken and his head hanging low and having to break it to the writing staff. We all felt we were doing it. We were making great Star Trek. For him to come back and say we can't and we can only do 2 episodes as opposed to 22, it was heartbreaking. There was an interesting division between what Rick Berman wanted the show to be, which was episodic and for the syndicated audience, and how we wanted to be creative storytellers playing with the Star Trek toy box. Year of Hell is such a fascinating point in Voyager history. So, yeah, it sounded like it crushed them, sad to say. Yeah, it was their own Year of Hell.
It's a great illustration of the difference between the DS9 writing room and the Voyager writing room, where if you get the entire writing room on fire about something, that shit is going to happen.
He talked about that also. Yeah. Dave, if you want to let everyone know, why did DS9 get away with that type of serialized storytelling where Voyager did not?
So, he says, Ira was like, I don't care. This is what we're doing, and if you don't like what we're doing, fire me. If you're not behind it, then I suggest you find someone else to do my job. He was kind of fearless about it. he was righteous creatively and knew this was the right direction for Deep Space Nine. So
Yeah.
I have heard many more stories about Ira that were exactly like that. That's how, not about this particular case, but on all sorts of issues. He was just like, nope, that's what we're doing, or you can get somebody else.
Bryan Fuller actually, at some point in this podcast, he actually said, I didn't include it in those quotes, Dave, but there's one point in here he actually says that Ira Stephen Bear, quote, didn't give a fuck what Rick Berman thought. Or what Rick Berman said, rather.
Yeah.
I think I have maybe more fandom for Voyager than many. What I've seen of it, I've ended up liking quite a bit. But it's for sure, it's a safer kind of show. It was a throwback in some ways to the sort of serialized next-gen storytelling. And most of the times when it plays, kind of up with the survival, marooned in space stuff, it didn't go too edgy with it. This episode actually was kind of very much an exception. Yeah. So it's kind of too bad. It just didn't seem like Voyager was like a necessarily sort of a writer's paradise for kind of pushing boundaries.
Yeah, and yes, Voyager they kept, make it like the Next Generation. What they forget is there's a contextual thing. Next Generation was pushing envelopes to some degree as it went along. DS9 wouldn't have been possible without building off of where Next Gen had pushed things. So making it like the Next Generation was, except that it's not pushing the envelopes, is kind of what Berman wanted, which of course really handicaps the writers, because
it's kind of a paradox.
It's regressive in a sense, because that's not the ideology in the writing room of Next Gen. They weren't sitting around saying, how can we make this more Next Gen, when they were writing Next Gen. So
general thoughts on this, like what are y'all's reactions? Like, do you like the episode?
Brian?
Okay, I'm not a huge Voyager fan. I as I've mentioned occasionally when I've been allowed to be, when you guys have invited me onto the podcast, but I like Year of Hell a lot. I liked it when I originally saw it. I was like, this is more like it. And admittedly, I was young and into edgy, grimdark shit in a way that I now kind of feel a bit embarrassed about. But they're going back and rewatching it again. No, Year of Hell is actually a great bit of, really good bit of science fiction, and one of the better high points in Voyager's run, and it's because they get to act, they get to dig out, and they're not just blandly following orders and being professional, and I mean, there were actual mandates in Voyager about not overacting too much, not getting too excited about anything that happened in the show. And here they get to get upset, they get to get angry, they get to get sad. It's so much more interesting just because of that.
Brian, there was a sequence, in their Nemo visit to Anarax, where Chakotay is clearly beginning to kind of sympathize with him, and Paris is not. Yeah. And I actually couldn't tell if this was like some kind of like they knew they were being watched. I'm so used to them being on the same page that I was like, oh, well, Chakotay isn't probably actually getting pulled in by this guy. They probably know that they're being watched, and he's just putting on a bit of a show so they can kind of good cop, bad cop it with it, and he can look like the loyalist. But no, that was just because I was used to that as a format. But because this episode is a bit of an exception, he got to kind of be a guy who was feeling this sympathy for the bad guy, and really did kind of want to give him some more time to try his plan out and stuff.
And so that's it. I like that tension between them. I like that, like when Chakotay is like, "Oh, are we gonna have to settle this the old-fashioned way?" Because when the show was created, that it was supposed to have that type of tension in the show.
Yeah. I felt like Paris, Tom got to kind of be a little bit more of what he was intended to be originally, but they almost immediately threw out, which was that this kind of this rebellious officer.
Yeah, and him and Chakotay were originally supposed to hate each other.
Yeah.
Just like Chakotay and Tuvok were supposed to hate each other, and Neelix and Paris were supposed to hate each other. Like all those dynamics, all those conflicts were all kind of just swept under the rug after a couple episodes.
Yeah. I would say I also want to say I think this might be Chakotay's best episode.
No, his best episode is the one where he got assimilated by the Borg.
His best episode was the one where he sent his Indian spirit out of his body and was flying around the ship.
Damn it, Fatheree, don't fuck this up with your stupid story.
No, this gets him. He gets to do a wide range of stuff that they don't really give Beltran. How do you say it? Beltran in most other episodes. He gets to be the center of attention. He gets to be the main focus, and they do something interesting with that. And he has to make some tricky moral calls about, is he going to do things the Starfleet way or the hit him on the head way?
Right, and he also, even early on, he had, although he's pretty quick to acquiesce to Janeway's plan, you can tell that he's doing it with this broken kind of disappointment. He's like, okay, that's what we're doing, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, I actually really do like that, whatever that Borg episode was.
Unity. Season 3.
Yeah. But I think there's a very good case for this episode. So I for sure.
My problem though with Chakotay in this episode is I feel like it's all really rushed. I think
like you don't get to see his arc, like Fatheree. It doesn't feel natural to you, or
right? Like he's a little too quick to get on the same page with Anarax. And largely I think Year of Hell does work fine as a two-parter. And I'm not sure if the Voyager writers at the time would have been able to pull off this big season-long arc. So yeah. I'm almost kind of glad. I really like season 4 of Voyager.
I want to see the 4-parter. That would have been, I think, right.
That would have been the happy compromise. But Rick Berman was so pissed off about DS9 season 6, which would have came out at the same time as this, right? Season 4 and season 6. That started with a 6-part episode that directly followed the season finale. So it's kind of like a 7-episode arc that I'm sure, based on what Bryan Fuller is saying, Rick Berman is really pissed off about that. So he was probably like, no, Brannon, no way in hell. You get 2 episodes.
Well, they actually had to lie to Berman about the war being over at the end of the 6-parter and then shoot something different. They actually just flat out tricked him about the war being over. But anyway, we're getting off topic.
Ira Stephen Bear has the bigger balls than Brannon Braga. He wasn't scared to upset the boss.
Yeah.
But anyways, I mean, this is what we got. This 2-part story, and I think the Chakotay part does suffer. Largely, I think it works well, but that Chakotay arc should have been there. Well, I would have felt better if we could follow that a little closer.
When he comes around to Paris, it also Paris's approach. It also kind of happens slightly abruptly. I
thought it was a little. I mean, I think Chakotay's on trying to work with Arronax up until Arronax blows up another entire planet. And then he's still kind of there, and Paris kind of, we can't really keep working. He blew up a planet. You said you could stop him from blowing up planets, and he blew up a planet. It's your method. The Starfleet way is not working. We have to hit him on the head. So,
well, we're kind of jumping all over the place. Let's go back to like kind of the beginning of this episode and talk about like what Anarax is doing, how that affects our crew members on Voyager. But we get like that opening that really explains it, where we see Voyager meeting the Zal species, and those guys seem pretty cool. They're like, oh yeah, come ahead and like pass through our territory. We're cool with that. And then
they're like, you're among friends when you're in the Zal space. He was almost a little kind of cocky in his friendliness. I sort of liked it though.
Well, we meet the Krenim in that other ship, and he's like, oh yeah, like these Krenim guys, like they think that this territory belongs to them, but just ignore them. They're like these little wimpy ships. And then all of a sudden, with Anarax erasing the Zal people when he activates his time weapon on their planet, the Zal guy goes away, and the Krenim ship is this big badass warship, and we see it change that captain from, he's kind of like this real. Initially, in the first timeline, he's kind of like this real like defensive. He's kind of like aggressive out because like he's like defensive and nervous, and he feels like he's got to like put on like a show, but he's actually like probably like a little nervous and scared. And then
their weapons don't do crap against Voyager when they take a few shots.
Yeah. But then after that, he gets like super confident and cocky, where he's like sitting back in his chair and he's just like, "Oh, you dare to pass through our territory? your little puny Voyager ship.
And the simple explanation for like what Anarax and his guys do is that they're kind of in a ship that's sort of out like in its own temporal bubble outside of time, right?
Yeah.
And it'd be like if they were like, oh, we're the Roman Empire and we're having trouble with the Gauls over there. It's really a definite problem. But if we could like sort of snap and remove them from ever having existed, then we retroactively jump to the present and we're much stronger because they never opposed us.
Yeah. Or
right?
much weaker because a lot of times it doesn't work out.
Right. Yeah. But they just keep going back to the drawing board and tweaking the formula this way or that. It's like they're doing little mad scientist tweaks.
Did you guys think Janeway was a little dismissive of that first Krenim ship? I mean, there was this kind of like, well, if they can't hurt us with their guns, I don't give a shit what they say. We can just go where we want.
The name Krenim. She should have known. Oh, Krenim. That's the people who Kes said gave us a year of hell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Clearly, they decided that this episode needed to so much stand alone that they didn't even want to reference.
But they do reference it. They do. They're inconsistent with their references. Too.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I guess that's. I don't know why they would be so inconsistent then. That just sounds like it's just maybe some sloppiness.
Yes.
Or maybe they changed intent a few times while they were getting it up and running, you know? Yeah. And you know what? I kind of like Janeway when she's kind of like doesn't take shit though, because they have been pushed to even the Voyager on like in less nightmarish times is. They feel that weight of time and that they need to be pressing on, that they have these limitations and sometimes supply limitations and tech limitations, and that they can't quite follow the super nice protocols of the Federation all the time. So I'm okay with her being a little bit hubristic.
Well, speaking of them feeling the weight of time in like this new timeline that Anarax's time ship created. It takes no time at all for like Voyager to really start taking a pounding, and we see that shot of those two crew members dying when they're trying to get to the Jeffries tube where the doctor is, and he has to like
which was amazing.
It's very well acted from Robert Picardo. Like if you watch like his face during that scene, like you feel his pain, and they also
closes the door on them as they're about to like. Vent all these, the whole level is about to get decompressed or whatever and blown out into space.
And they reference it later. They don't just like do it and forget about it. They actually like let that pain linger with him. Yeah. And
like he gets on Tom Paris's case during this triage sequence, and he's like, "Hey, you need to get objective." And Paris catches that there's some edge to him, and he draws out that it's sticking with him.
That was during day 47.
Yeah.
Yep. So. Oh, and by the way, speaking of the different little titling days, I wanted to say that one of the things that got this off on a good foot with me early on was this actually would go on to be used somewhat similarly in 33 again for Battlestar Galactica, where every 33 minutes the Cylons catch up with them and they have to warp jump out before they get completely wrecked. When you pop up that day one at the beginning, like in the first scene or whatever. It feels like that, and the episode is called Year of Hell. Like there's this sense of like of a freight train coming, and I just like the kind of ominousness and suspense it creates, even when things don't feel super ominous just yet.
And they do a good job of making it feel like worse and worse and worse. But even here, like day 47, things are pretty bad. This is actually when 7 of 9 does the Kes thing from before and after and scans the torpedo to see the 1.47 microseconds as like how I guess like the way these torpedoes work is they're kind of like out of flux. How could it
possibly be a bad day with that many 47s? There's a 1.47. It's day 47. It must be a great day, right?
Well, and this episode is also co-written by Joe Menosky, who's responsible for the 47 in Star Trek. But that sequence with Kes and Tuvok that when she kind of I guess
7 and Tuvok.
I'm sorry, with 7. Yeah, it was originally with Kes, but
right.
I think initially when they were breaking the story, the idea was for Kes to be the one who's bonding with Tuvok and kind of being like his caregiver, being like, I could shave you if you need help shaving now that you're blind, partially my fault, or like being the one to like guide him through the corridors and make sure he doesn't like trip on any debris now that he's blinded. But if you look at like a typical season 4 Voyager episode, like after they added 7 of 9 to the crew, they really tried to put her front and center. And I think a lot of those stories are actually really great. And I love Jeri Ryan. She's my favorite Voyager character, and I had like a huge crush on her as a teenager, seeing this stuff for the first time. But I feel like with this, they were just kind of doing what they had initially planned for Kes with 7, and that's why she has a smaller part than in most of the big Voyager episodes in season 4.
The stuff she gets is with Tuvok is actually really good. I always wanted to see more 7 Tuvok scenes, and I loved the ones we got here.
Yeah, they have some good exchanges there. And was this maybe the first time when they set up, Tuvok and 7 being like the two like intellectuals talking about like how irrational and illogical all the humans are? Because we see that several times throughout the course of the show. And Bryan, you brought up that this could be how they write Number 1 and Spock in Strange New Worlds.
Yeah, that certainly there could be a bit of a prototype here for that, or at least a practice run. It's certainly the writers should take a look at it and think about it. So yeah, I really enjoyed all that stuff.
That scene where the scene where we see Tuvok shaving, I did not know. I think it unfolded as probably it was intended to for me as a first time viewer. I did not realize he was blind at first.
Yeah.
His hands are shaking a little bit as he's shaving, and I think you see like a cut on him from a previous thing, and he's like shaving with like a knife, not their cool, whatever futuristic stuff they want to use in the episode.
Geordi had like this little electro razor that he shaved with in the season 1 TNG episode Code of Honor.
I remember in the books they talked about just like something that they used, like there was like beard suppressor that was I don't know, just something either it just didn't grow. Which anyway, whatever the case.
I could use that. I've been growing a big hairy mud beard. This is like, as bearded as I haven't been clean shaven in a decade, but I haven't like trimmed my beard since March, and now like whenever I eat, I get like big pieces of face hair go into my mouth too.
Yeah, but it's cool. You get to be a mountain man. Yes. But anyway, so I found that scene very like kind of affecting and like a good indicator of like the tone of this episode, that we would see somebody like Tuvok, who's kind of almost a little bit breaking down, and his dignity, which is like so always seemingly so important to the Vulcans, is threatened because he can't do something so simple as shave without potentially risking himself. He has to ask somebody to help him. They don't literally have him speak about it, but it's very much implied by the body language of it. There was some good very fine acting on, is it Tim Russ?
Yes.
The actor on his part.
Interesting that he's blind, because he originally auditioned for Geordi LaForge.
Yeah,
and of course lost out to LeVar Burton, but he finally gets to play a blind Starfleet officer.
Yay!
I kind of like the method that we got. I mean, I guess he ended up on a less good show, but I think Tim Russ was the guy to play Tuvok, and it's always hard to find a good Vulcan actor.
Yeah. Actually, my favorite moment in this episode, we'll get to it when we get to it, but it was a Tuvok moment. And I always give Tim Russ a lot of credit for being the one guy in Star Trek who got to play a Vulcan as a regular cast member, but got to play him as like a true Vulcan. He's not like a half human. He's not like T'Pol, who's gonna like fall in love with a human and like experiment with some sides of humanity. Or he actually like stays like a very Vulcanish Vulcan all the way through.
Yeah,
I like that. And I also love that like he's not like a science officer Vulcan. He's like, oh well, we've already seen that. What would a Vulcan security chief be like? And they got to do something a little different with it.
I have to just quick mention, actually, the episode just prior to this. Do you know the name of it, Fatheree? Scientific Method, I think. Is the one?
Oh yeah.
It's the one where these sort of out of sync with our reality or whatever, and basically invisible aliens are performing creepy experiments on the Voyager's crew that make them think
I remember that one.
Dave, just to emphasize my point earlier, who was the main character of that episode, and who's the one who has to like figure it out and solve everything?
That is 7.
Yes. So that was like how typical Voyager was written after she came into the show. That's why I think this was initially written with like Kes in mind.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I just wanted to mention Tim Russ has a great scene in that. Actually, one of my favorite scenes that I've seen with him in it. Janeway, unbeknownst to her at the time, is like really broken down because she's been having these like migraines and she can't sleep, and there's all this anxiety over everything, and the crews are getting all these mysterious illnesses. and she's saying very like in this very pained voice to Tuvok, her old friend. She's saying that when it's all done, she needs to spend some time in the holodeck, like in this valley or like in the Tuscany or whatever, and have some wine and on the holodeck and get past this. And he kind of sits next to her and he's like, I will have a glass of wine with you on that day. And it's a very, like, for him that's like a hug. And I think she puts her hand up on his hand when that happens. It's a really sweet scene without sort of getting too schmaltzy, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, he rarely went to that place.
That's her oldest friend on the ship. And the we get more on that later, but so when we're here around, I think in my notes, let me double check, but this is day 65 when we have like blind Tuvok walking around and stuff. And
here's a question about that. Why isn't Seven has got this roommate she doesn't like? Why isn't Seven Tuvok's roommate? A, Tuvok could probably use a roommate now that he's blind. And B, those two would get along together like a house on fire. They'd be fine. And Tuvok's got one of those big senior officers' quarters, so it's not like he doesn't have room for a spare person in there.
I imagine micromanaging sort of the crew habitation is probably one of those things that was just like, they do it when they can, but like half the time they were probably like, we need to be repairing shit instead.
Well,
so they may have just not gotten around to it.
Why the hell does 7 of 9 live in someone's quarters now when she needs a cargo bay to regenerate? So if you're low on quarters, it makes absolutely no sense to take, okay, here's someone who doesn't even live in quarters, and we're going to assign her to be someone's roommate.
Well,
but that was the Voyager writers, doing dumb stuff without thinking it through, which was fairly typical.
Did they say that she'd been moved to somebody else's quarters?
Yes.
Or that they had just put this other crew member?
She leaves her clothes like all over the floor in the quarters or something like that. She either says quarters or cabin.
Yeah. Well, I mean, shit's gotten real. They have to rig up some sort of improvised charging system for Seven to regenerate in. I can believe that.
But they definitely don't mention it, of course.
Yeah.
They gotta get on with
it. To me, it feels like they forgot that she like lives in the cargo bay.
I can accept that there's all these things broken and there's a lot of things getting fixed and broken that don't have time to tell us about.
But they throughout the rest of the show, which I haven't seen, is she always in the cargo bay?
Yes.
Okay.
This is the only time she's ever been moved into someone's quarters.
Yeah.
But
there was, as far as I was just thinking as a sort of a general tone thing. One of the things is like instantly when they get to this timeline, the Year of Hell timeline, where they get wrecked by Anorax's ship repeatedly, or his
get wrecked
people.
by his ship repeatedly.
Yeah, what do they call it? The Krenim, not Kremen, but Krenim. Is that literally every scene on the Voyager is dark. Like the lights are always in like either battle mode low, or it just seems like the lighting is screwed up because the ship is so damaged. So it's visually different from like every other Voyager episode because it looks like they're moving around in this dark, spooky castle.
Yeah. Except for Tuvok's quarters, where he doesn't need to have the lights on, but he does.
Yeah,
that's for the audience. That's nitpicking.
It's also impressive to me how like they keep managing to get more and more debris and shit like all over the floor as the episode goes on. Like
everybody is all smudged up too.
Worse and worse.
And Catherine and Janeway has like ultimate bedhead throughout this.
This is the first time we see her with the short hair, by the way, when she cut her hair.
Yeah. For whatever it's worth, I think it looks good. It gets all messy and stuff, but she kind of looks by the end of, especially the second episode, when she's just wearing that like tank top kind of thing, which she's worn before, but she kind of looks badass and like a little Sarah Connor-ish in her kind of broken down survivalist mode. Yeah.
Like I love macrocosm with those giant viruses that take over the ship, and she has to turn into like an action hero and fight them. And
I like the idea of it. I don't think I really like the episode.
I remember you disliking it, but I love that one. And
so dumb.
She herself is cool because she's all running around with a gun and looking cool.
Yes. But so here when we're at day 65, what stood out to me is that when they say like there's another Krenim ship coming to attack. Mm-hmm. You're just kind of like, oh shit! Like, how can they handle any more after they show us like what Tuvok's condition is, how terrible the ship is? But this is kind of like a funny moment when Anorax had restored the Krenim Imperium to 98%, but he didn't get that colony back with his wife.
Yeah.
So they try again, and they revert to a pre-warp society.
Yeah.
Which I think is in my notes. I actually wrote trollolololololo.
Yeah, Janeway is like, she's like, oh, we're gonna win now or whatever. I just want to know why we're gonna win. You know?
But this is when they had their temporal shields.
Yes.
And the irony being, they never mentioned this in the episode, but the irony being, if Voyager hadn't developed those temporal shields, or at least turned them off here, they probably would have like undone all that damage that they had incurred. But of course, there's no way they could have known that.
Well, I mean, my assumption is that when he reset it, there is another Voyager out there somewhere that encountered things completely differently and probably sailed right through this whole sector of space because there were no Krenim to stop them, and there's another Voyager that's way ahead of them.
I don't think it works like
everything was fine
because those temporal shields keep you from being changed in the timeline. So I think,
but that wouldn't mean. But if everything outside of you changes, then there would still be that other Voyager that didn't get hurt. And probably at first I thought, why don't they run into the other Voyagers every time history changed? And I thought, actually, with the way history is changing, most of them are probably light years ahead and on their way. They probably never even got stuck here. This is just.
I think you just wouldn't exist in that new timeline.
So the other Voyager would have just snapped out of existence suddenly and appeared in this new location with all beat up and with different memories.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it makes more sense if it's still out there. I mean, until the timeline gets reset again, because this other Voyager has no temporal shield, so it lasts only as long as that timeline does.
Because the idea of like what their weapon does, like it actually like removes things from time altogether.
If it hits you, whatever it hits gets removed from time. But Voyager wasn't hit by it, so it should still just be an altered Voyager out there someplace. But anyway, I mean, it's Star Trek time travel. Who knows? But
this is kind of like causality paradoxes stuff, which they bring up in the episode. That
I did like. Unlike a lot of Voyager, they set up the rules for how time travel works in this story, and they play by them pretty damn fair the whole way through. They don't cheat it or break it, and I felt like, as far as time travel stories go in Star Trek, this is a pretty well thought out one.
The one thing that bothers me is that if Anorax and the people on his ship are like 200 years old, and I assume like they don't age, it's weird that like they still like eat and drink and sleep and stuff.
I just assumed they're one of those races that live for 400 or something years and hand wave that. But you're right, it just seems a little goofy.
It does seem like they're just basically in a sort of null time or whatever. It's interesting that. Well, go ahead, Brian.
The scene where we meet Anorax and they do their first incursion, I thought was masterfully written. We explain this incredibly complex process in just a scene with two people talking, basically. And we set up all the dynamics of the crew, who these people are in general, and what's going on with the technobabble and our science fiction, all in one very efficient scene that is also exciting and interesting and scary. That was some brilliant bit of writing there for Star Trek.
I guess I felt it was both. I appreciated that it was Anorax had a sort of a deeper motivation of trying to restore both the Empire to power, but he only cared if he also could get his wife's colony back and get her back.
So they give him a personal stake in it.
So I appreciate that, but I still felt that was ultimately kind of tropey and not like, it wasn't a real deep presentation of it. It was exactly what I guessed it was in that first scene. But I did appreciate it, and like it was also a part of that is like you almost immediately see that this guy has kind of a deeper motivation than being just a big bad.
This is also when they realize, Voyager is immune to our time shifting. Maybe they're the reason why we went from 98% restoration to pre-warp society. So let's go check out this anomaly Voyager. And that's when they abduct Tom Paris and Chakotay. It's the end of part one is when Voyager has to kind of abandon them and go to warp, even though like the ship is losing structural integrity and is kind of falling apart. And
Yeah, it's cool. When they actually have to flee from them, it's like literally the outer hull is like all peeling off and like everything is stripping off.
It makes you sad for the ship to see it all tore up like that.
Yeah. I was like, wow, because we've never seen the structural integrity fields starting to fail in that fashion, and I thought it was bits of the ship ripping off was a wonderful visual thing.
Memory Alpha had some behind-the-scenes stuff, and I guess it was maybe Berman who said this, that they wanted to beat the hell out of the ship. They were like wanted the the special effects guys, the sort of one of the high concepts was just getting to see Voyager just shredded. And they for sure were playing around with it at that point. The special effects throughout this are all very good. Yeah. I didn't think that the Krenim ships were like amazing looking, but they're well used and solid. And like all the effects related to their temporal stuff look great.
Well, they were using that same design that we got from Before and After. I think they even reused some shots from that. When we see that Voyager attack a Krenim ship and blow it up, I think they reused that footage.
But the other thing that happened at the end, aside from this episode, aside from Chakotay and Tom getting taken, is that Janeway finally does the sort of abandoned ship for most of the crew, not the senior officers.
Yeah.
Which she said earlier she never wanted to do. And so here we see her doing what she refused to do.
They do actually say the life support is failing. They literally cannot provide enough food and air for these people. It's either that or stick them on a planet.
I like that she's got this kind of tough Starfleet attitude about it, where she's like, hey, listen, she's like, once you get going, make allies where you can, try and do anything you can to, to get further along, get better ships or whatever. She's like, because or improve your tech. She's like, because when we catch up with you, and we will catch up with you, I want to, you better be ready to roll and, tell me your interesting story. Yeah. So I kind of, it's a pretty good, it's not one of these big Independence Day pep talks, but it's kind of a, hey, we're going to find you, so don't screw up your escape. I kind of like the toughness of it.
I was going to say this episode has a lot of good Janeway stuff. She is really being like a badass captain in this episode. To the point to where she's willing to go down with the ship at the end. But you also get.
I thought that was a little bit weirdly old-fashioned. It's one of those things I associate so strongly with Kirk that I didn't necessarily need to see her do that.
Even though Kirk didn't go down with his ship in Star Trek 3?
I don't know. Kirk hasn't. He's done it before. I guess hasn't he? Has he not done that? Well, he's talked about it a zillion times on TOS. I feel like. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just thinking of they make so many references to his love for the ship and how it's his true love. But I guess I don't need that from every captain. I don't need for every one of them to have fallen in love with the ship. It's a kind of it feels a little retrograde for her to have it too.
I need that though. For me to respect you as a captain on a Star Trek show, I need you to have that level of dedication.
She was she is such a huge asset. To me, it's actually showing that she slightly is devaluing the crew because she wants to go out with this tradition when she could in fact be so much potentially more helpful to them alive.
You're hating on my favorite moment in the entire show that made me cry.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Well, pray continue, sir.
Well, I did want to say about the escape pods. They never mentioned the possibility that if history gets changed again, those escape pods might never have been launched in the new timeline. And unless they have temporal shielding, all those people are going to disappear and be gone. And maybe they all the escape pods have temporal shielding. Maybe they do. I don't know. But otherwise, they're all going to vanish if Aronnax does another incursion thing because they're outside of Voyager.
Shielding, though, it seems pretty easy to replicate. They're able to give it to allies and.
Well, yeah. I just don't know if you can put it on tiny little escape pods. That was my question.
Chakotay seems to think you can put it on an entire planet. So
yeah, well, I big things. I just wasn't sure. A line of dialogue would have been enough for me.
If these escape pods are bound together, how Bryan Fuller was talking about, I assume they're attached to a shuttlecraft, and you could probably rig up the shuttlecraft shields to do it.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is certainly that makes more sense. Though it also means you run a risk every time you leave the shuttle to go get supplies.
But speaking of Janeway, we get that conversation between her and the doctor, which is kind of a Star Trek trope where the medical officer is telling someone in command that they will relieve them of duty.
You
and
need
she
to
just
sleep.
basically
You
says
need to
no.
chill out. Yeah.
Like he's like, I'm ordering you under Starfleet regulations to.
Yeah, I actually she took it a little step farther, and I liked it where she was like, she's like, well, actually, there's kind of a funny scene. Well, she's like, you're gonna have to like shoot me with a phaser to stop me, and by the way, this was after some pretty like kind of notably harsh stuff that she had done. She had gone into like. She had like chemical burns on her lungs from going into this like deck that was filled with toxic
when
atmosphere.
She ran into the fire to turn the deflector back on.
Yeah, she literally.
That was her being a badass captain.
That was amazing.
Yeah, she literally ran into the fire for the crew, and so the doctor understandably was trying to say, "Hey, you need bed rest for a few days," and she was like, "Nah, fuck that." And it's kind of funny because they have this fairly serious conversation where he's saying like, "Hey, I will, he cares about her, but he's also threatening her with almost like sort of legal repercussions. And he's like, I'm going to note this in my log or whatever.
Yeah. No, he told her, he's like, yeah, you're going to, if we get back to Earth, you're going to be court-martialed for this.
Yeah. Her response is not quite as good as, but it's somewhat paraphrased, like Sigourney Weaver potentially blowing up the installation in Aliens. And she's like, they can bill me.
Yeah.
Well, she says like I would welcome that court martial.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's like, after all of this, it's gonna be that'd be nothing.
Yeah.
And the other thing I like with Janeway here is when Chakotay tries to give her a birthday present with that pocket watch, and she's like, no, recycle it because we can't waste replicator
that
energy.
annoyed me because it takes a certain amount of energy to build it into a watch, and then it's going to take a certain amount of energy to take it apart out of watch form, and you have hunks of metal lying all over the floor that nobody's bothering to recycle.
Well, I mean, if you want to get into the nitty gritty, like, you could assume that maybe it makes more to make a complex structure than it does to break it down. But
there's metal on the floor that's already being abandoned and ignored by everybody.
I mean, you got to give him some poetic license here. He had made something meaningful to her, and she's like, recycle it for the effort. It's a pretty straightforward concept.
I love the scene. The scene was great. Just the line about recycle it, I didn't like.
Then later when she's like, oh, he refused orders, and it's still here, and then she starts carrying it around. I think it looks cool, and just. With my personal like obsession with time, like not unlike Anorax or Soren from Star Trek Generations, how I kind of feel like time is always against me and I never have enough time, and I just think like watches and clocks and stuff are cool. Like I've worn a watch every day of my life since 1992, even though like in the cell phone era, like I guess like watches aren't as commonplace now, but
yeah, we all carry a pocket watch. It's called a cell phone.
Yeah, but it's so much easier just to look at your wrist. Instead of pulling something out of your pocket.
But that's interesting that you have that fascination, Fatheree. While I was watching that scene, I slightly stepped out of the episode. Nothing through the fault of the episode, but to think, when they made all those Star Trek action figures in the 90s, it would have been kind of cool if they had done that battle-damaged Janeway in tank top with pocket watch and burns on her arm and face. That would have been a badass, dope figure.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
I would have liked that.
The little pocket watch is a separate accessory you can clip onto the belt. Yeah.
Before we talk about the ending, let's talk about the time ship and what's going on after Chakotay and Paris are abducted and taken over there, and that's when we get like all those Captain Nemo scenes and Paris kind of like conspiring against Anorax and teaming up with that other
Anorax
Colonel
is like
dude.
His mentor too. He's like, you're getting to be a pretty good time, turner person analyzer yourself. You've got a natural instinct for this, son.
Oh, when Chakotay wanted to erase a comet, and then Anorax was like, no, that would wipe out 8,000 civilizations. It was like, really? That's like what one comet does, but you're like extinguishing like entire populations of planets.
Well, I think that it emphasizes just how much care and thought he is putting into these genocides.
He is seemingly trying to minimize damage, even though he has also decided that time is a living entity that wants vengeance on him. So he's not all there, but...
Well, is he? Or has he realized that there's a scriptwriter who's going to make sure he pays for his crimes? He has, in a sense, realized that he's stuck in a Star Trek episode, and there's a writer who's going to call him on all of this. He's
I don't think
not
that was
wrong
their
when
intent, but I like the idea. I like it. As
he's
a crazy
not
fan
wrong.
theory.
I mean, he's insane. No, he's not. He actually is. He actually has realized exactly what's going on a level that nobody else on the show has realized. So.
I don't think that he realized he was a fictional character, but
no, but he has realized that there's some big entity that can control time that is after him because of his crimes. He says that, and that is in fact true. So he misnames it, but that's about his problem.
I do like some of the dialogue that they give him, where one line that I wrote down: "I can control the destiny of a single molecule or an entire civilization." But then he just cuts very nonchalantly to "How's the wine?" Yeah, that's when you kind of start to see the cracks in him. It's oh yeah, this guy is talking about insane shit. He's like a god who controls fate itself. And he's oh, is that wine pretty good?
Yeah.
I wrote down something earlier that he said too when he's talking to his kind of chief lieutenant, and the guy's like, "Hey, we just got a complete temporal restoration out of this incursion," and he's like, "Complete?" And his lieutenant's like, "Yes, sir." And he's like, "If I told you to count the stars in the cosmos, would the task ever be complete?" And he's like, "Sir?" And then he goes, "Our attempt may be sufficient. They may even be relatively successful, but they will never be complete. Choose your words with more precision."
Yeah.
And that's one of those where that actor can he can deliver it with the intensity of that sort of both a madman, but also a kind of a controlled madness.
He can chew the scene.
He can chew the scene.
Yes.
They give him the kind of the lost cost or sunken cost fallacy, where if you're say you buy a junker car real cheap, but then you're trying to fix it up, and the more and more you try to repair it, you end up spending more money on it, and it's always getting more expensive to try to fix. And you're oh, but if I just spend another $1,000, I can get it up and running perfect. But you get to a point to where you're thinking, oh, I've already invested so much, I got to keep going.
Yes,
which is
right.
Yeah, he can't stop. Well, certainly not when things are bad, because he's killed all these people. It's got to mean something. The only way it means something is if he's restored the Imperium. Now, you could argue about the 97% scene. Well, maybe that was good enough, and he's probably a little crazy to keep going after that. But
his
you can totally see why. I can totally see why he doesn't stop at 50%.
He defended
because he
it
can't.
well.
He does.
When Chakotay tells him, what makes you think you'll ever get to that 100%? And he says to Chakotay, what makes you think Voyager will ever reach Earth?
Yeah. No, he's great. He's a superb villain or antagonist.
He's worked up his justifications for what he needs to do.
Yeah, which kind of talks about how he's the sort of guy who lies in bed and has to come up with a justification. He can't just be okay with it. He can't just say, "Well, they weren't my people, so they don't matter." He's like, "No, this has to have been for something." I like that Chakotay is kind of trying to do the Starfleet thing. I mean, on one hand, he's so naive for trying to work with this guy, but that is if you can talk to the villain, if the villain is willing to sit down and eat with you and listen to your ideas, and maybe you can work out some sort of compromise, that's the path you're supposed to take in Star Trek. And Chakotay tries to walk that path really hard and kind of feels like he's succeeding, and really kind of needs Paris to say, he just blew up a whole planet. You're not succeeding, but
Chakotay does kind of, he is traditionally very open-minded, and he does, sympathize with other people. He's the guy who left Starfleet to go become a freedom fighter for the Maquis. And here, even after Anarax is go, I think it's really obvious that this 200-year war with time has taken a toll on him when he's telling him only time can judge me and stuff where he basically admits he thinks time has a vendetta against him. And Paris is this guy is fucking bonkers, but Chakotay still kind of defends. He's no, he's just suffered, he lost his wife, his children, his grandchildren, think about that, think of what that must be like to live through that. Chakotay is still very sympathetic to him all the way to the end, but eventually he does side with Paris and agree to conspire against Anarax and contact Voyager, where Janeway has formed an alliance with these these two other alien species, and they figure out that, okay, if we destroy the temporal core, which I guess is like the MacGuffin, this is like the reset button that fixes everything of this episode.
Yeah.
If we do that, then we win. And I do want to talk about like that coordinated attack and that ending. The scene I keep bringing up that was my favorite is when Janeway does have that speech about she's going to pilot Voyager herself, which I disagree, Dave, when Janeway's the one who figures out that, yeah, the most essential thing she can do is slam Voyager into the temporal core, and that will actually fix everything. So it makes the most sense for her to stay on the ship.
I don't think she knows that that's going to fix reset everything. I just think she figures, if I'm going to take out that weapon, this is going to stop. No more resets. That's and I think the moment she says, I'm going to stay on the ship by myself, she knows she's going to die. She knows this is a kamikaze mission. She knows she's not coming back. She's not telling the rest of the crew because they'll interfere, but she knows what she's got her plan. She's got her plan.
Yeah. In her defense of that, when she says like, we can't abandon Voyager, we owe the ship too much. It's done too much for us. I actually like wrote down the exchange that her and Tuvok have, where Tuvok says, "Curious. I have never understood the human compulsion to bond with inanimate objects. The vessel has done nothing. It is an assemblage of bulkheads, conduits, titanium, nothing more." And then Janeway replies with, "Oh, you're wrong. It's much more than this. The ship has been our home. It kept us together. It's been part of our family. As illogical as this might sound, I feel as close to Voyager as I do to any other member of my crew. It's carried us, Tuvok, even nurtured us. And right now it needs one of us." And then when they hug each other, when she hugs like the blind Tuvok, who can't even like he can't even like see her, so I can't even say like, it's the last time they see each other. Yeah. But when he just very subtly, this is Tim Russ being great at playing Tuvok, when he just very subtly taps her on the back of the shoulder.
Yeah. Right. Like you don't expect him to return the embrace, and it looks like initially that he won't. And then you just see him very softly kind of do it.
For him, for the most Vulcanist Vulcan to ever Vulcan in Star Trek, that is just like an outburst of love and affection.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that makes me cry when that happens.
Oh, it is a great scene. I if I wasn't so annoyed with Janeway and all these other Voyager episodes, it would have made me cry. I absolutely, because it is perfectly performed.
You know that part where he's like, it'd be a good sick burn when he's like, "I've never understood the human compulsion to bond with inanimate objects," and she's like, "I bonded with you." That would have been pretty good.
Time and place, Dave.
I don't think that's not Jane.
I'm working on a comedic version of this in my head.
Yeah, as many different versions of Janeway as we've gotten over those 7 seasons, I never saw that one.
But yeah, and then speaking of Janeway as an action hero, we get like a little bit like space combat at the end when the Krenim time ship can still kick ass.
They go to conventional weapons and just start duking it out, and he takes out a couple of the other alien allies. Those poor bastards.
But when Janeway says, "Okay, everyone, drop your shields. This will fix everything," and she flies into the core, she has the very like action hero dialogue of like she says, "This is one year I'd like to forget," and then after that she says, "Time's up."
Yeah, she should have quit with the first one. Time's up was dumb.
I like the Time's up.
Oh man,
I think it was like her delivery of it. I don't think she said it like traditional sort of action hero style.
Well, I think she did, but that's why I like it, because it was.
Okay, fair enough. I guess I would say I agree with you, Fatheree. I liked it, even if we liked it for slightly different reasons.
I do want to ask y'all, how do you feel about this ending? Because a lot of people fucking hate this, where, there's actually like no consequence, none of this happened, and they just hit like a big reset button, and this was something that the writers fought against. They wanted someone to remember this, or there had to be like some price to pay to fix everything.
I usually do prefer that, but I actually have seen that often enough now too, where one person remembers or whatever. That's kind of become its own trope. I did feel like the ending felt hasty to me. I think I don't know quite what I would have wanted. I honestly think I would have been okay with like here's a question: could the Voyager have stayed as nearly wrecked? Oh, I guess it got blown up. I guess they couldn't have continued on with that. But if it hadn't been destroyed, if they had like recovered all of the other crew members, had like lost a big, I don't know how many people they were supposed to have died throughout this thing, but I presume a decent number. But I would have been okay if they had just limped away from it and barely survived, and like because they were because they were still inside their time bubble or whatever. History fixed itself, their time bubble dissipated or whatever, but they were still as damaged as they were. And then the next few episodes might be about them getting repairs on various worlds.
Or here was my like alternative that I thought of would be, what if they had kept Kes around until this, and it would have to be like some type of self-sacrifice from her, which actually allowed like everything else to be fixed except she wouldn't get to exist anymore for whatever reason, some timey-wimey reason or something like that, where like someone actually does have to do like a legit self-sacrifice.
Do you mean Fatheree, that she would be removed from time, all like never having existed?
No, but just like things? I mean, like they wrote her out of the show, so I think this would have been a good opportunity to give her a more meaningful exit.
Yeah.
I for sure could be down with that. I did, like, I remember I took note that I was, at some point I paused briefly and I was like, oh, there's just like 7 minutes left in this episode and it feels like it needs like 20 minutes more to breathe. Like, I want some slightly Lord of the Rings-ish denouement where some people are saying goodbye and I get to feel some feelings because, like, enough has happened to make this different from other episodes that I kind of want it to happen just a little bit more slowly and for the emotions to breathe.
So, I'm going to defy fandom here. I don't mind the reset here. This is an episode where a guy builds a giant reset switch and he runs around irresponsibly hitting that reset button over and over and over again to try to get things back to where he wants to be. And at the end, the solution is smash the reset button and it resets everything that was reset by the reset button. It actually makes a whole lot of logical sense. It's properly foreshadowed. It's very organic to this particular story. This is probably the best reset button episode of Star Trek ever made. Because normally I hate the reset button, but this one felt like it earned it. And especially if you took away all the other crappy ones, this one I think everyone would be fine with.
And I still enjoy it, in spite of the reset button.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here.
And Janeway's sacrifice, ramming the ship in there, is totally awesome and still works with the logic of the story. I would Chuck who does Sci-Fi Debris suggested, wouldn't it have been great if somehow the Harry Kim from that Year of Hell fell through into the normal universe and he was the only thing that survived from that other the Year of Hell timeline, and he had to tell and explain everyone what happened, and they could even do a reset of his personality so he'd be more interesting because he'd done some shit and seen some shit. And I thought that was an amazingly cool idea, but I'm fine with the reset in general. If they'd had some sort of message or Harry Kim or whatever, I would have been okay with that. But in general, I like the reset.
There was one of the more hard-ass scenes in it is Harry Kim and B'Elanna asking trivia questions to each other while they're trapped in this isolated section because she's like gonna like collapse from pain otherwise, and they need to keep her awake. At some point, Harry Kim says he's like a super sports freak though, and when he answers some sports questions, and I was like,
Parisi squares.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know if I quite buy it. He didn't.
Well, most people
he never
like
gave off.
I don't know. He seems like a guy who would like watch NBA or something to me. But
I don't know. I guess he felt like he was one of those guys who, like a lot of Next Generation characters, would go and watch operas or
he watched Parisi Squares while playing his clarinet, like you do.
But they also referenced Star Trek First Contact there, and they were also talking about Cary Grant and Clark Gable movies. But I want to mention like they bring up like holographic versions of it, which kind of ties into Calypso now, where we see Kraft doing the holographic version of that Audrey Hepburn movie, Funny Face.
So, The
By the
bit
way,
you found it. What I found unbelievable was that B'Elanna says, "I don't know anything about 20th century entertainment," and yet she's coming very close to being accurate on movies I've never even heard of before. And I'm somebody who's devoted a ridiculous amount of my life to studying film and television, an embarrassing amount. And I still didn't like. She's in the 24th century. She knows more about 20th century entertainment than I do. And I lived through most of that, or a good hunk of that.
Star Trek doesn't like to reference any real-life pop culture that didn't exist before the original series. It had to be at least in the 50s or older, or else they don't want to bring it up.
Yeah, and then she doesn't know which human how the Phoenix was the first human warp drive ship, even though she's half human.
Even though Geordi
she's an engineer.
In First Contact, Geordi says the first chapter on warp science in the textbook is called Zephram Cochrane.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that scene essentially was slightly awkwardly existed because they wanted to have Seven be the one to answer the question, which was kind of cool, where they're like, how do you know that? And she's like, oh, yeah, the Borg were there. And she's like, story for a future reference.
I know, but they still could have accomplished that and just put like a tiny bit more thought in that.
Yeah, sure. No, I agree.
They've done the same thing.
It was slightly lazy writing.
I mean, like, Brannon Braga, you co-wrote this and you co-wrote First Contact. Like, you should know this better than me.
It was a little. A part of the problem is that at the same moment that B'Elanna is shown to be awesome at something she says she's bad at, she is also shown to be bad at something she's supposed to be good at, i.e. warp engineering. And so in the same boom, boom, and that really highlights the contradiction for me.
You know what? They could have just swapped all of the dialogue between Harry and B'Elanna, and that would have worked a lot better, maybe.
Yeah, it kind of would.
It is cool to have Seven mention First Contact. You know, at the time when we didn't have a lot of like shared universe stuff, there wasn't like the Marvel Cinematic Universe crossing over all the time. Seeing things like that, oh, this Voyager episode references that First Contact movie I just saw not that long ago. That was really cool. I think we are running low on time, so I just want to like close out by asking like, what are some of the things in this episode that, if any, that you thought like you could kind of connect to, like with real life, with just kind of like the ongoing struggle of 2020. Like for me, one of them was when Janeway is kind of shocked it's her birthday. It's May 20th, and she says, "I thought we were still in April."
Yeah,
that's definitely a sentiment I hear a lot now.
Earlier about that, those memes about you know, how it feels like stuff that happened just a week ago or like a few weeks back was half a year ago. So yeah, for sure.
Another one I had was it felt a little scary because right now our hospitals in Austin, Texas are about at max capacity with COVID patients.
Yeah.
And we really don't need to overflow anymore, or else we're going to have like people in like filled hospitals where they might not get as good of care. And when that sequence of like Tom Paris and the doctor triaging people, it felt a little too real right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, for real. Father, I didn't know you were going to ask this. I don't have anything to relate it to the real world. You know what's weird is like I was thinking that like I do relate to this more just like I like some of the fictional ideas of sometimes when heroes are really pushed to the edge, when they are forced to face, you know, when they lose their resources. One of my favorite comic book stories is Daredevil Born Again, Frank Miller's story of Daredevil getting stripped of like everything, you know, his identity doesn't get outed, but his worst enemy knows who it is. He destroys his life. He even like loses his grip on sanity and like is attacking police officers and stuff like that, like choking one out and stuff. It's a fairly disturbing scene. He's beating up criminals violently and just living this horrible
up by
life.
Santa Claus.
He gets stabbed by this guy who's dressed in a who's dressed in a Santa Claus suit. Is just this low rent criminal, but yeah, he just comes up and he just like knifes him.
But we see him like completely dismantled, and he has to like come back from the brink. This episode makes me think of Born Again also.
Yeah, and it like I honestly I don't think it's quite of the caliber of Born Again, but it had some of those qualities that I like as far as like how do you come back from that. I think something I wish it would have had was a little bit more of like a morality struggle, you know, that I kind of wanted to see. I liked seeing Chakotay sort of struggle with the Nemo side of things, but things were so dark for the Voyager that I kind of wanted to see, like, I think maybe some more of those moral struggles, like, well, what kind of dirty tactics would they be willing to do? They put some other aliens in line to help them, and they built a quick coalition. I wish they almost would have emphasized that they were maybe doing some kind of messed up things and asking these aliens to sacrifice on their behalf.
I think we can agree what Bryan said at the top of the show is that if they had done the 4-episode version, they didn't need to do like the entire season, because I'm not sure if it would have worked as an entire season. I like it a pretty good bit as a two-parter.
I sort of agree.
The 4 episodes, I think that would have been like the way to go.
Yeah. I think with the right writers, you could have done the whole season. I'm not convinced Voyager had the right writers, but I think they could have made an amazing 4-parter.
Yeah. Because it definitely does seem like they put a lot of thought into some aspects of this. And they wanted to do something big and good. Yeah. Bryan, do you have any closing thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, well, I guess there were parts of it that felt a little more rough coming back and watching it again, and I realized that's because I've watched New Battlestar Galactica and I've watched Stargate Universe. But this show came first. This show did this ragtag falling apart, the skin of our teeth, a ship on the run. Voyager did that before any of those other shows came along and did it. And you got to give some points to Voyager for doing it first and doing a pretty damn good job. So, and as far as Stargate Universe is a show that I often feel like connect to when I find my life is going shitty and the world around me seems to be shitty, and for very much the same reason that you're connecting with Year of Hell. It's the same sort of story, the same sort of struggles that these characters are going through. So yeah, I think that needs to be said.
Yeah, fair enough. Credit where due, Star Trek.
Yeah. And, all those shots seeing the Voyager all battle damage and stuff, I do wonder, like, what if they had just a little bit of this throughout the show, maybe, like, if they took, like, a beating from the Borg in an episode in season 4, maybe that should still be there in, like, season 6, It should just carry through.
Yeah,
but, I mean,
there were some no doubt missed opportunities, and this episode kind of highlights how they could have done it. I did want to just real quick mention, by the way, speaking of the battle damage, it looked great when the Voyager wrecks into their ship at the end. It was just a fantastic almost movie level special effect.
I don't think it was movie level CGI at all, but
I don't know, 1995 or whatever.
It felt big.
Whatever.
For the time it came out, it was pretty damn impressive on TV.
Because I noticed that sometimes I would see CG in the 90s where when ships broke up, they would break up in these kind of awkward ways. Even in Helm's Deep in the 2000s in Lord of the Rings, the way those, not Helm's Deep, in Moria, when those rocks are cracking and falling while they're running across them, I was like, oh, those are kind of falling in slightly stilted physics ways. But I was noticing, like, the way the nacelle broke off and kind of exploded when they impacted it. It felt like more work done into it. Like, it was a little bit more elaborate in its physics. I don't know if it was all CG or if there was any model work in there. But I thought it looked decidedly above average.
That was all CG, and it's weird because Foundation was working on this episode at the same time they were doing the DS9 episode Sacrifice of Angels, which Dave, I know you haven't seen, but Bryan, like, that was some big CGI shit going down in that episode with a big battle. But that's gonna do it for Year of Hell. If you have anything to add to the conversation, we certainly would like to hear it. So be sure to comment or tweet at us or let us know on Facebook or however you want to communicate it, and share your thoughts on this. And hopefully your 2020 is going better than the Voyager crew's Year of Hell, and the second half of this year will be better than the first.
Maybe we can hit that reset button somewhere.
Maybe. We got to find the temporal core.
Voting booth.
There you go.
But I'm going to go ahead and sign us off, and we'll be back at some point in July. I don't know when. I don't know what we'll be talking about, but we shall return. Until then, though, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek. And follow Fatheree on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.